the old granny speech of, in my day, what's happened in 30 years of ponds, 25 years of ponds. Now, hang on, do I just carry on? Yeah. I've got 10 minutes, 10 slides to summarise 30 years of pond conservation. In fact, I think it dovetails in very well with the speakers that have been, the speakers that have come, and I'd like to give an unashamedly Suffolk look at this and say that what I'm really going to be talking about is Suffolk farmland ponds rather than those on pristine nature reserves. They're the ones that, if they're tested, will definitely be in the red bracket, enriched, full of nasty things from many years of neglect. Now, this is some work, there are an estimated 22,000 ponds. Now, a lot of those are farmland ponds, and that's what I'm talking about. The red stars you can ignore, they are Great Crested Newt records, but obviously Great Crested Newts are brilliant indicators of good quality ponds, and certainly time doesn't allow me, you'll be relieved to know, to do my courtship dance of the Great Crested Newt, but it has converted many a farmer. So, really important, charismatic species, definitely not. Very important charismatic species, but the longer I've been looking at ponds, the more I want to get into the beetles and the stoneworts and the other things that are really much more difficult and challenging. But I'm afraid when you give a Latin-named stonewort to a farmer, he's not going to respond the same way as if you do a courtship dance of the newt. So, I've got a few slides to just look at the main headings of what I think has changed. And I'd say, firstly, landowner attitude. When I came to Suffolk first in 1985, 1986, ponds were really a nuisance. They were in the way, in fields. They were something to be annoyed about. You were, very nice if you were giving it a buffer, but really they were in the way. They were to be infilled. And I've seen so many ponds that have been infilled, drained around, hence why they're dry now and maybe ghost ponds today. And they were nuisances. Then people realised, landowners realised that actually if you've got a grant, you clean out one of your 35 ponds, and actually it was really good PR, because within a year you've got dragonflies, you've got smooth newts, you've got all sorts of things, and it looked pretty. So actually they became very good public relations vehicles, and I would say that a lot of farmers cleaned out at least one pond. And certainly I was advising, going out doing my whole farm reports, and I was thrilled to bits if a landowner had cleaned out one of as many ponds. What I feel guilty about now is that the aftercare advice, I think I wasn't strong enough about saying what you should continue doing to keep that pond open and sunny and good and all those other things we know about. I think there's been a huge positive change towards ponds latterly with countryside stewardship and so on. Landowners, have done so much work with them over the years. They really do understand ponds more, and they really want to do more. They're no longer a nuisance, and I think that's a genuine shift in attitude. But what I would say is there is still a thing where 50% of landowners say, well, I've got lots of ponds, what more do you want? They're not thinking this pond is a dark hole full of nutrients, leaf litter. It's actually got very little, if anything, of any value in it. They're saying, well, it's a pond. A pond is about habitat, therefore it must be good. And then the other half are saying, well, I love ponds, and I've been to all these talks and things, and I want to have my bit of open water, my few emergent plants, and I want to have this. But it's an image of what is an aesthetically pleasing pond. And if you divert from that image, it's, I don't know, I like my bit of open water. So I think, I'm constantly told my pond is choked, and I go, it's just a glorious pond. Secondly, grant-led pond conservation. I mean, most people don't do anything, most landowners don't do anything unless there's a grant. That is what leads the way in conservation. And when I first came, it was Countryside Commission, and you could restore a pond as long as the public could see it. And that was really the basis on which you got a grant. We then moved on to environmentally sensitive areas, then countryside stewardship, and gradually what landowners have to do to get the grant, the hoops they have to jump through, has become more refined and more challenging, and rightly so. In 2005, there was a thing called FEPs, Farm Environment Plans, that every landowner had to have if they wanted to go into high-level stewardship. And in theory, a pond should have been surveyed as well as a meadow. But in reality, they weren't. There was still a correlation. You know, this is a pond, it's this size, or it's shaded. And that was about all you had to do. But in fact, it's when we got involved and we were called in to look at a lot of ponds in more detail. And it's quite telling. I've actually got a figure here that the number of ponds that were actually restored, the number of ponds that was restored with Suffolk Wildlife Trust. We were between 2004 and 2006 and 2010 high-level schemes. We were involved in 74% of agreements involving ponds, and we advised on 84% of the ponds in the agreements. In other words, 89 out of the 106 that were restored. So we made sure ponds were really surveyed very thoroughly, albeit on the back of great-breasted newt, usually. But that was a shift in the detail we got into in surveying. So I mean, it's actually great to see these projects coming on where we're looking at ponds in great detail, because they just haven't been, so many of them. And if I was only looking at 100 ponds a year, I would spread very thinly on the ground. You know, I've only touched the surface of the estimated 22,000. So what are pond influences? Well, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, when I started with FWAG, there were some lovely Countryside Commission A4 sheets that covered everything. Everything you could possibly want to know on ponds was on one or two sides of A4. And it was very formulaic. You know, a pond should be this, this and this. It should be this deep, and it should never dry out. And there were various things that you were told. And obviously, I went forth and must have told several people that this is what you should do. In the 1990s, early 1990s, we had a farmer naturalist. I don't know whether John Digby's here today, but he was very, very forward in his thinking. He said, you know, we've got to question the standard formulaic approach to pond conservation. And he made everybody in Suffolk FWAG, myself, you know, we set up a little project and we started actually questioning this formulaic advice. And for that, I'm very grateful that, you know, he did do that, because he was ahead of his time. And parallel to that was the Pond Actions Oxford Pond Survey, which exploded myths and misconceptions about ponds. So it was kind of all going at the same time. I was then fortunate enough to be asked to get involved in surveying ponds under Suffolk Wildlife Trust pond project. And we had absolutely looking at ponds at a spanking pace. You know, I was sent out and you've got to look at X number of ponds a year, which I did, and became a complete pond bore and newt bore, because you become so obsessed with them. But I never felt, even then, I had enough time. And of course, it wasn't just surveying ponds, it was following it up with restoration advice to restore them under stewardship schemes. And I have to be honest, you know, I'd often come home and think, well, I don't know what the answer is to do with this one. You know, if you ask 10 different advisors, you ask a water beetle specialist, somebody else specialist, you know, we all survey a pond for our own thing, we're all going to come up with 10 different answers. So, you know, I still come away thinking, crikey, I'm going to have to think about my bath tonight, because I don't know what the answer is off the top of my head. You know, I need some measured time for this. Unfortunately, we don't have time. We don't have the funds to do that. So I think having volunteers come forward and do a lot of that survey work is going to inform so much better the advice we give. We can fine-tune it. And then obviously we've heard about the Freshwater Habitats Trust. And what I would say is those of you that, you know, want to get involved do, but equally if you've got ponds at home and you need information, there is just the most brilliant wealth of information on those on that website. You cannot better it. And it's certainly one of my thoughts. So the advice. So in Suffolk, we very much majored on giving restoration advice over creation. So we said, you know what, we've got all this clay land, you dig a pond, most of these 22,000 ponds have been dug as a byproduct. They've been created as a byproduct for digging for clay lump to build your houses or to build bricks to build your houses. And we've said, well, why would you go out and dig new ones when you can restore degraded old ones? And historically, we know that in the 1500s, Thomas Tusser was actually giving very good advice, saying, in September, you go out and you rotationally clean out your ponds. That was part of the farming calendar, was clean out your ponds, you'll take the leaflet of the organic matter and improve your fields, your heavy clay fields with them. So we said, you know what, we're not going to look at creation, so we've hardly ever suggested people create ponds over restoring old ones. Now the early advisors, and I count myself in that to a certain extent, I was giving formulaic advice when I first started, I really didn't know any better, and other advisors were actually selling pond conservation to farmers on the back of, you can make money out of fish, you can have a better shoot, so pour in the duck, or other things like put crayfish in there, you can get them live on the market and shove them in there. So you have these early ones selling it, you've got to make money out of the ponds. There were very few people that were actually advising on how to restore ponds for conservation, for water beetles, stoneworms, newts. We've always, and we still do, have very limited time, i.e. money, to give detailed advice, to have the luxury of surveying ponds. But what I would say is what we've seen is advice going from very generalist to now, certainly with Suffolk Wildlife Trust, is very species and habitat focused and evidence-based advice. So we too have our very detailed forms so that when you go away you can actually think about the advice you give and it's much more measured. And whilst I would love to rave about these gorgeous beetles, which I'm in love with, and the stoneworts, which I find really exciting, it isn't going to tick the box for landowners. They do need a species that they can really get and fall in love with, like the great crested newt. It's just a great one. So it's become much more species and habitat focused, which is great, but we're still only scratching the surface. What I would say is there are still incredibly few specialist advisors, and I noticed, you're talking about training people. What we found, and we'll talk about that in a second, is that we can train people to detect great crested newts and so on, but you try getting people to identify different pond breeds or stoneworts, it's really, really hard. So I'm sure in my years I would have missed thousands of interesting plants that I just didn't recognise. So now I noticed that Grove Farm wasn't mentioned as a flagship pond, but I believe it has been designated. Our Suffolk Wildlife Trust make sure it's at Grove Farm, where we've got 20 ponds. 9 were actually new, so we branched out a bit there, and 11 are restored or to be restored. And with a Suffolk Naturalist Society bursary, we tooled up and trained up 20 University of Third Age volunteers who were absolutely fantastic in getting stuck in collecting specimens for Adrian Chalkley to identify, and in actually monitoring the pond several times a year, recording what the plants were doing, what newts were doing, and to that end we got over, I've got it here, over 400 pond records, it's probably a lot more than that. We've recorded 91 species of aquatic invertebrate, including 17 that are nationally notable. Now, I suspect that if we go back to any of the ponds we've restored in Suffolk, we're going to find similar results, but there's just no one monitoring them. There is no money for it. One of the things that was really exciting here was the tasseled stoneworm turned up. It's only been recorded 7 times in the UK since 1970, and it's a bat priority species. So this information that we've been collecting here, I hope that it's going to really guide us and inform us about how we can manage these ponds rotationally to benefit target species. And it's been a fantastic project, and I would say to any of the Grove Farm volunteers who are here, your work is not done, because now you can see there's all the ponds in Suffolk to go forth with these kits and do more. So our scheme there definitely involved training and a lot of expertise from Adrian here. So elsewhere, yes, just one brief thing. Elsewhere, we have monitored farm ponds where landowners have done wholesale, really good restoration work on their farms. And what we found going back is that the ponds now qualify as what Natural England define as high-quality ponds, high-value ponds. So actually, it doesn't take much work to do, and we can get it done. Time is creeping on, and nearly there. So, what are pond priorities today? Well, I'd like to be ending on a really positive note, but one of the things that really saddens me is that ponds, which are the jewel in Suffolk's clayland crown, they are not a countryside stewardship priority habitat. Now, it may be that I've bored Natural England rigid with ponds and newts, but it's really strange that Suffolk, that has one of the highest density pond networks in the country, in their target statements for countryside stewardship, they do not include ponds. It's bat habitat. There's numerous bat species associated with ponds, but no, I'm sorry, it doesn't make it onto the target statement, which I think is a really very strange omission. We did feed into the target statements, but it's almost like, because we've got so many, they're not deemed a priority. And I think that is a great shame. Amazingly, Great Crested Newt did make it as a priority species, and it's difficult to see why it's a priority, but the habitat isn't. So it's a strange thing. Bat stoneworks, they're not listed as priority species and target statement. The natterjack toad on the coast where they're reintroducing it is a priority. So that's a shame. But it doesn't mean we're going to stop advising, and we will continue our advice to get people to restore rather than create. And a final thought, when people get worried about people doing too much wholesale, people are restoring too many ponds on one farm, what I would say is that under higher level scheme, we worked out that 0.2% of ponds were being restored a year with grant aid. So we've got quite a lot more to do. Thank you.